This week in Frontline Clubs, we're going to be looking at the subject of spiritual warfare. I'm reading right now about a man named Alvin York. This is him right here. He was from a tiny little town in Tennessee, but then he went to war in World War I. And he and his fellow soldiers went to Europe to fight in that war. But before they went, they needed to be trained, and they needed equipment. Can you imagine if he and those other soldiers had left their homes and then went straight to the battlefield? What if they hadn't been taught how to fight? What if they hadn't been given any kind of equipment or anything to fight with? How do you think that would have gone? Not well at all, of course. They had to be trained. They had to be prepared. And we talked last week about how important it is to be prepared. Well, the Book of Ephesians, chapter 6, talks about a war that we are all in. It says there, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." We aren't fighting in a war the way that Alvin York and those other soldiers were. We're fighting in a spiritual war. In other words, we're trying to live the way that God wants us to, but we have to fight against Satan and against sin. Those soldiers in World War I needed a lot of equipment to help them to be ready. They needed to be ready to be in the trenches. They needed to be ready to fight. And they needed to be protected. This is a picture of what a World War I soldier's helmet looked like. Alvin York and those other soldiers were ready for war. York was also ready because he knew God, and he was depending on God for his help. Ephesians 6 talks about the equipment that we need to be ready to fight against sin. We often call it the armor of God. Tonight, you're going to be learning more about spiritual warfare and how you can be ready to fight for God and fight against sin. We're going to work on learning Ephesians 6:10, which says, "Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of His might." The key to having victory in our spiritual warfare is that we are on God's side. When we follow Him, we can have the strength to win. I hope that you've all gotten off to a good start with your journal pages, and I look forward to seeing many of you this evening as we learn about our part in spiritual warfare.